I flew back to London from Cape Town the next night. Tissues and crying, and then I thought, look, I've got to get a grip here and do something useful for Diana, and I decided the first thing that needed to be done was to find somebody to write and deliver the eulogy.
For nearly 3 decades, one man has sat in silence while the entire world turned Diana's memory into merchandise. No interviews, no documentaries, no Netflix deals, no access granted to anyone, not the BBC, not ITV, not the biggest streaming budgets Hollywood could assemble. Just a locked gate, a sealed archive, and a quiet refusal that has outlasted every offer thrown at it. His name is Charles Spencer, the 9th Earl Spencer, Diana's youngest brother, and something has just changed. The silence that defined him for 28 years has broken, and what came out of it is shaking every corner of the royal world. Tonight, you are going to hear exactly what he said, why he said it, what he was reportedly asked to give up, and what the 4 words he reportedly fired back at a major Netflix proposal in early 2026 reveal about the state of this family. Stay with me, because this story has been building for nearly 3 decades, and it is not what most people think it is. Let us start with who Charles Spencer actually is, because most people genuinely cannot answer that question beyond one single moment. Westminster Abbey, September 6, 1997. A young man in a black suit standing at a lectern inside one of the most famous churches on earth, reading words so raw and so furious that the applause beginning outside in the streets forced its way through stone walls and stained glass and landed inside like thunder. He looked directly at the royal family seated in front of him and made a vow, not a sentiment, not a condolence, a promise, that Diana's sons would be raised with warmth, with imagination, protected from the cold machinery that had, in his own words, destroyed their mother. 2 billion people watched him mean every word, and then he drove back to Northamptonshire. That is the last moment most of the world logged his existence, and here is why that matters. Everything he has done since has been in service of that promise. Every refusal, every sealed archive, every locked gate has been the quiet continuation of the vow he made in front of the world, which means that what just happened is not a random event. It is a man who never breaks his word, finally deciding that breaking his silence is the only way to keep it. Now, to understand why Charles Spencer reacted to this particular proposal the way he allegedly did, you need to understand what was inside it. Because once you hear the full picture of what was reportedly being asked for, the response stops looking like aristocratic dismissal and starts looking like the only possible answer a man in his position could give. The pitch was a grand anniversary documentary timed for 2027, 30 years since Paris, 30 years since the world lost Diana. On the surface it sounds meaningful, a cinematic tribute, an emotional reckoning. Netflix was reportedly attached, the budget described as substantial, but what the project actually required tells a completely different story. The production team reportedly wanted Althorp itself, the childhood home, the grounds, the island on the lake where Diana is buried. They wanted access to her handwritten diaries, pages she wrote privately, never intended for publication. They wanted the unseen home movies, the unguarded, intimate footage of a real woman before the world turned her into an icon. Without those elements, this would have been another recycled documentary built from the same 30-year-old archive footage every other production has used. With them, it would have been the definitive Diana film of the century. And there was one more element, the one that reportedly stopped Charles Spencer cold. The pitch apparently called for drawing a direct line between Diana's war with the establishment and Meghan Markle's war with the same forces, positioning Meghan as the modern successor to Diana's story. The same cause, the same enemy, the same courage. Diana's legacy formally transferred to a new name. Now ask yourself what Charles Spencer was reading when he reached that page, and ask yourself whether you would have been surprised by what came next. Is this a joke? 4 words. That is all he reportedly sent back. And the moment you understand the history behind those 4 words, you realize they carry the weight of nearly 3 decades. Because Charles Spencer is not protecting a brand, he is doing penance. Here is the detail that most royal coverage refuses to sit with long enough, because it is uncomfortable and it is personal and it changes everything. By long-standing accounts, it was Charles Spencer who first introduced his sister to Martin Bashir, the journalist behind the 1995 Panorama interview.
Do you think you'll ever be queen?
No, I don't. No.
Why do you think that?
I'd like to be a queen of people's hearts, in people's hearts, but I don't see myself being queen of this country.
The interview the world now knows was secured through forged documents, fabricated bank statements, manufactured evidence of betrayal, a deliberate psychological operation designed to convince a frightened and vulnerable woman that everyone around her was an enemy. Diana's suffering was not a side effect of that broadcast. Her suffering was the mechanism, and her younger brother innocently, unknowingly, had opened the door. When the full truth about how that interview was obtained emerged years later, it reportedly hit Charles Spencer with the force of a structural collapse, because it meant that however unknowingly, however lovingly, he had played a part in one of the most damaging moments of his sister's final years. Think about what that realization does to a person. You spend your adult life believing you are your sister's protector. You stand in Westminster Abbey and make a promise to shield her sons from the machinery that consumed her. And then you discover that the most psychologically devastating media event of her lifetime walked in through a door you held open. Everything since has reportedly been an act of repair. The sealed diaries, the unseen footage, the locked archive, the turned-down offers, the choice to bury Diana at Althorp rather than surrender her resting place to any institution. He has been making absolutely certain that nobody, not a journalist, not a network, not a streaming platform, can ever do to Diana in death what was done to her in life. And then the pitch arrived, asking for everything, the diaries, the footage, the island, the originals, and asked him to use them to crown a successor. But before we get to what happened next, we need to go back slightly, because the Netflix proposal did not arrive without context. There was a pattern that had been building for years, and Charles Spencer was allegedly watching every step of it. It began warmly. At the royal wedding in May 2018, Meghan arrived wearing Diana's aquamarine ring, a pale blue stone recognizable to anyone with even a passing knowledge of Diana's story. From where Spencer stood, it likely felt like family, like remembrance. Then came the butterfly earrings, then the Cartier tank watch, then the gold bracelets. One by one, item by item, each piece that had once belonged to Diana appeared on Meghan at events where the cameras were not merely present but guaranteed. Major occasions, carefully staged arrivals, maximum photographic coverage, every single time. And here is the question you need to sit with. Once is tribute, twice is feeling, but every single time in front of a guaranteed lens? That is a deliberate choice. Charles Spencer was reportedly watching all of it. Then came March 2021, the Oprah interview. Low lighting, a soft and intimate setting, one woman speaking to one sympathetic interviewer about an institution that had silenced her, dismissed her suffering, left her isolated with no exit. If you know Diana's story with any depth, the architecture is impossible to miss. It rhymes almost beat for beat with Diana's own 1995 Panorama interview, an isolated royal wife, a faceless institution deaf to her pain, every door shut except the one leading directly to the public. But there is one critical difference between 1995 and 2021 that nobody talks about loudly enough. Diana gave her interview from inside a system with everything to lose and nowhere to go. The 2021 version was filmed from a villa in California after the exit, with a production team attached and a streaming arrangement already in place. One was a cry for help. The other was reportedly a launch. Sitting in the house where his sister grew up, Charles Spencer allegedly did not watch that hour as a tribute to Diana. He watched it as a very specific kind of mirror, and the reflection reportedly disturbed him deeply. Now set all of that against what was happening commercially in early 2026. Because to understand why the documentary mattered so desperately to the Sussex operation, you have to look honestly at where things stood. The $100 million Netflix arrangement was reportedly approaching expiry. The lifestyle series With Love, Meghan had arrived to reviews so brutal they defied easy summary. The Guardian, a publication that had spent years defending Meghan against unfair treatment, awarded it 1 star and suggested it might be the last thing she ever makes for the platform. The Spotify deal was already gone, American Riviera Orchard was stalling, and here is the single fact that unlocks everything. The couple's debut documentary about their royal exit remains the most watched debut in Netflix history. Every project since has met a colder response. The audience was sending a message in capital letters. The world is not interested in Meghan's lifestyle brand. The world is interested in royal wounds, which means that when the brunch economy collapsed, the only card left with guaranteed global reach was the one printed with Diana's name. The documentary was not a passion project, it was a rescue operation. The deepest royal wound there is, framed as a tribute, packaged for streaming. And the man at Althorp reportedly tore it apart in 4 words. And here is where the story takes a turn that most mainstream coverage has buried entirely. Charles Spencer did not simply reject the proposal, he reportedly went further. Sources close to the palace describe a letter sent by Spencer to Prince William, urging the future king to break his public silence on the Sussex situation, not as an emotional overture, as strategy, as an argument about the global standing of the British monarchy. In the letter, Spencer reportedly warned that the royal family's policy of total silence is actively handing Harry and Meghan an open microphone, that the unchecked narrative from Montecito is filling every gap the palace refuses to occupy, that Harry in particular has been diminished in the eyes of the world, no longer seen as the soldier or the statesman, but as a reactive figure consumed entirely by his own exit story. Stop and absorb what that means. Diana's brother, the man who stood at her funeral and challenged the Windsors to their faces with the eyes of the world upon him, is now reportedly urging the future king to defend the crown's reputation. If you wanted a single moment that shows how completely this saga has rearranged every loyalty in this family, that is it. Meanwhile, the core fracture between the royal family and the Sussexes remains exactly where it has been. Trust does not exist. The palace's deepest fear is not Meghan's grievances. It is her content calendar. The concern, reportedly, is that any private conversation becomes raw material for the next production, that every quiet family moment gets filed and packaged and turned into a streaming product. That is what has made reconciliation impossible. Not anger, not distance. The calendar. Both sides of this deserve honest weight before you decide where you land. William never consented to his grief being turned into a content drop with a premiere date. He never agreed to the worst day of his life being packaged by people who will profit from it. That is real, that is human. And Harry watched his mother die. He walked behind her coffin at 13 years old in front of every camera on earth. He carried that loss through wars and scandals and the slow collapse of everything he thought his family was. His memories are his. Nobody else can touch them. Nobody else lived them. That is also real. That is also human. Both of these things are true, simultaneously, which is what makes this conflict genuinely painful rather than simply dramatic. The real villain here, if you want to name one, is not a person. It is the machine that looks at a mother's handwritten diaries and calculates their algorithm value. The industry that has spent 30 years constructing an economy on a woman's tragedy and then expresses astonishment when the people closest to that tragedy want ownership of the story. Charles Spencer has been quietly fighting that machine for 28 years with no press releases and no applause, just a locked gate and a word he never broke. The vault at Althorp stays sealed. And in a media landscape built entirely on turning grief into content, that silence may be the most powerful statement anyone connected to Diana has made since the day she died. The question now is what comes next, whether Netflix walks, whether Harry eventually makes that journey to London alone, whether William responds to the letter that nobody expected. When anything moves, you will hear it here first. This is Royal Pulse, where whispers around the crown come to light.